DiasExMachina. I am doing a quick little Q&A. I'm going to get everything going here so my overlay so people can pop in and chat when they wish. And I'll have the overlay there and post them when I can. But we are talking Amethyst. I did one at the beginning to talk about, mostly talking about Affinity and a few other things. But we are going to talk about Amethyst and what's going on with the Kickstarter and what the future lies. I got behind me a bunch of books, which kind of goes into detail in the history of Amethyst for a lot of people who have been confused or unclear about how old Amethyst does. A few fans who've been following this do know very well how far back Amethyst goes. It started as a homebrew game that was conceived in, I think, in the early aughts, 2000, 2001. I was asked to run a third edition game, which I hadn't done at that point, and I dusted off an old fantasy setting I had called Amethyst. It was just a post-apocalyptic story with dragons, which I had abandoned once the film Reign of Fire came out, and I took traditional D&D and I crammed it into this setting, and that was the setting that we ran with for a couple of years until I did a big retcon about a year in, where I pulled those cliched elements out, added disruption, and then in 2006 I started making the push to get it published in totality as an actual original product. When I was doing homebrew, I had approached a bunch of artists to ask permission to see if I can actually use their artwork for this homebrew project. And 99% of them responded with, thank you for asking. No one ever actually asked. They just steal. Only one of them actually ever said no. And one of the people who did that was, one of the people who said yes was Nick. There were a few other people that said yes that were so enthusiastic about me asking permission. They even offered to do additional work that was original for the project just because they were so appreciative. One of those people ended up becoming a very, very well-known artist named Jamie Jones. Jamie Jones was, let's see, he ended up working to, well, I have my live on thingy going here, so I know that somebody went and he increased their pledge from 75 to 300. Thank you. If that ever, I'm going to keep that going. So thank you, Jeremy. And we'll be talking about those and questions you might have. But going back to what I was saying, when I decided to go official, I approached a lot of these artists. Most of them wouldn't do black and white, which is the reason why I did not pursue them. And Nick was the only one who would do black and white, and he gave me pretty reasonable rates, and so that's who I went with, and that started that relationship that continues today. And now Nick is almost as fully associated with Amethyst as I am, and yeah, suffice to say, that relationship has continued. There has never been, although there were other artists, some of them very well known. Eventually, we kind of pushed them all out. And so we just have Nick. And so I think even in factions, we don't have anyone else's artwork. And when we do our reprint and our re-edit, we basically pushed all of that out. So there are some very, 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 very good illustrations that you guys will never see anymore. And most of that can be seen. Let's see, I probably buried it. Yes, I did. But I'm going to show some of these off, because this is the original. So this is the original Amethyst book that was published in 2008. This is one of the only hardcovers. I only made 20, and a few. I don't think I sold any of them. They were all given to my friends. This was done on Microsoft Word. That's how I did the layout on this thing, and it kind of shows. It's very dense. Very, very dense. It's considered apocryphal. I ended up changing a bunch of stuff before we got to Amethyst Foundations, which is the 4th edition book. But we still have Nick's art, which of course was black and white at the time. And the illustration cover is not Nick. This illustration is, like I said, limited editions. There's 19 of 21 books that were made. and these came with this kind of plate that was taped inside. But what I wanted to get at was the fact that the illustration here was done by a guy named Jamie Jones, who ended up working for Wizards of the Coast, did a lot of Magic the Gathering stuff. And let's see, there's a Ravane, whole bunch of. I actually have Magic decks that have a bunch of illustrations by him. And then he left Magic the Gathering, and he went for this. He got hired by this a really obscure company I don't think you've heard of called Bungie, and he worked on these weird games like I've never heard of, like Halo and Destiny. I guess those are games people play, but anyway, he's kind of a big name now. And then Nick Greenwood, Catherine Dinger, and Desmond Ing. Catherine Dinger, I did reach out to do some work, and there's one of her illustrations right there. In the end, I kind of I felt there was not a good match there, and I felt the quality was amazing and then low, and I ended up unfortunately letting go of her illustration. Although she was one of the last ones, Jamie Jones did actually other illustrations, and he did some really fantastic and kind of more surreal illustrations, and that made it all the way into Foundations. Dinger's artwork, some of it, only one or two of her illustrations made it through. There's a Dinger illustration right there. That one is in this book, and you would never see it again, I think. That actually is originally in color. Jamie Jones and Dinger did color illustration, so we did not. So there's a color illustration to that. But it does, unfortunately, kind of look like Barney attacking a dragon wrapped in cabbage. I'm not a terrible fan of it. Not as much as like compared to Desmond, who was a friend of mine. And that's one of Desmond's illustrations. That really didn't fit at all. And so when we went to Foundations, all of those illustrations got cut. Jones's illustrations lasted quite a long time, but by the time we got to the preprint for Quintessence and Factions and so forth, we started slowly replacing all of those illustrations with Nick Greenwood stuff. But that is this book. Now, this one actually is very kind of large and encompassing. It does actually involve, let's see here, all of North and South America. These were the old maps, which I didn't care for, and then these were all replaced by maps by my editor, Christopher Stilson. So these all got replaced. And it's I would say very primitive. So that was the 2008 book. It's also very dark. I mean, you can barely see any detail, even with, of course, this cover's been worn after a while, but it's hard to really see any detail. So this was not a good cover. Even though Jamie Jones is an amazing illustrator, you can barely see any detail. But this is also right from the novel, mind you. There is Misha and Aiden in the center, and then Raven at the end there. And this is supposed to be the City of Angel, which is in the story. This is specifically the lower tech Asian district called Janai. And that's how you can't even see, you can barely see the city, like the cyberpunkish city in the background. It's very, very faded. And then that was that until we got to when we went 4th edition, and then 4th edition gave ways to our agreement with Goodman Games. This is the only book that had Goodman Games as a collaboration. We had a new cover. The cover was actually this one right here, but our publisher said, no, you put the hot girl on the front, and that became the cover. And then you'll notice that this is the only time this happened, because after that, with Quintessence, we flipped it. In fact, we actually removed him completely. This one's still in black and white, and this was for 4th edition. I did not do the layout on this one. This was done by, this is done by Todd Crapper. Yes, I do believe this was done by Jeremy Simmons, was the cartographer. He still works with me today. I still have my team: Conan, Chris Brown, Skylar Dundo, Cameron Ladder, none of which work with anymore. Joshua Raynack, sorry, that's who it was. Joshua Raynack did the layout of this one, and Joshua did. I think he's actually really, really good, and he did all the 4th edition stuff. Now I had a pretty good I had pretty good experience with 4th edition, but I still felt going into 4th edition there were still some issues. I felt the physical printing was not great. As you can see, it's very dark. You can't see any detail on the land shark or the nomad. And it's kind of, I wouldn't say primitive per se, but it is very angular, just image and then flat text and so forth. It was pretty good at the time, but once again, illustrations are way too dark. But that was our fourth edition. But this came out, and then of course we know fourth edition kind of faded out, and Goodman Games abandoned it. And because he abandoned it, he abandoned us. So we decided to, because we got to keep our IP, we decided to follow it up with this book, Evolution, which is more like a kind of expansion rebranding. We basically included a bunch of stuff that we cut out of Foundations, but we also added in stuff that supported fourth edition essentials, which was really big at the time. And there was also, I hate to say, more of a big errata to fix some of the issues that I noticed. So this one was, I think, also done by Josh, but I think this would be the last one he would work on. He's actually a good guy, but I just learned how to do it myself. And then I moved from Microsoft Word to Microsoft Publisher, which was also still not a great idea, but we'll get into that later. So that was the next book. This came out, I want to say, in 2010. Still having issues with contrast, mind you. Some of the illustrations still come out really, really dark. But this is a print on demand. There was no physical print of this one. I want to say 2011. 2011 is when this came out. And that was it for Amethyst until we got to our 2014 Kickstarter, which was to get, it's more on me, to reprint Amethyst in color. It was still not going to have a print run, and we started doing, actually around the same time, I sent out a very famous public letter to Wizards of the Coast. It was published on Living Dice, and it went viral, at least in the gaming circles. I'm not sure a lot of people remember that, where I pleaded with Wizards to send out an olive branch to the third party, because all the third parties had abandoned them, and Wizards wasn't doing much to keep the third parties that was still supporting them. Like me, I was one of the few. I was probably the largest company. By the time we got to 2012, 2013, 2014, I was one of the last companies that was still publishing stuff. Hello, Ryu the Katsuni. Anyway, so I then, as a result of that, even though Wizard didn't answer the open call, who did was a guy named Chris Weitz. I want to say Chris Weitz, who ran Paizo, and he invited me to adapt Amethyst to Pathfinder, and I did. And that was this one, Amethyst Renaissance. Now you'll notice the first thing I did, of course, is that we swapped out the girl, who is almost completely obscured now, with the guy, and that becomes Renaissance. Now this is my first kind of book. I adapted it to Pathfinder myself. Still like a kind of primitive, still having issues with, unfortunately, the contrast issue, but that's always going to be an issue with print on demand, right? Kind of simplistic kind of table design, but it was a very, very effective and so forth. And so when we ran our Kickstarter in 2014, it was to do a color reboot. We were going to combine elements from Amethyst Foundations and Amethyst Evolution, redo this in color as Amethyst Renaissance 2.0, and then also adapt it for Fate, Savage World, 13th Age, and eventually 5th edition, which at the time had not come out with an OGL or a GSL, which became controversial because a lot of publishers weren't coming after me, but they were basically claiming that I couldn't make the claim that I could publish for 5th edition. And they were all wrong, because you absolutely could. I knew from Goodman Games what wording to use to publish stuff for 5th edition, even if I didn't have the OGL. But of course, as some people knew, I actually did know. I had been told from 5th edition, sorry, from Wizards of the Coast, that there was one coming out. I couldn't say that. I said it in confidence to somebody, and then they blasted it out to social media, and that's a long story. That's why I say I don't talk to that person anymore. And so that was Renaissance. So we moved that over to that pile. And so then we got into the Kickstarter books, which start off with Renaissance 2.0, right, which adapted some of the rules. But the important thing is now it was in color. It was an easy book to do because I just have to replace it. Now, like I said, these were done using Microsoft Publisher. So now when the tables look a lot better, their color, right? Still, I mean, the illustration is still very, I won't say jarring per se, but there's always like there's a faded background around them, but there's no mix. There's not really embedded because there's at that point we weren't doing transparencies. Everything had a background to it, so everything had to be faded, but the illustrations were quite big. The other thing was that let's see, get to a chapter start here. Yeah. The other thing about the old books is that we would take these illustrations and then explode them to be a big 2-page thing. I decided we won't be doing that just because it eats up a lot of space. These illustrations were designed to be smaller half-page, so they do get a little blurry when you expand them to this size. But that was Renaissance 2.0. And then, of course, we would do, there you go, 4th edition as well. Now there's the 4th edition book. This is Compendium. So this is now a combination of the original Amethyst Foundations from Goodman Games and my Amethyst Evolution book. So it is the largest of the core books at 454 pages. It is very, very big. Right? So this is going to look a lot like what we saw with Renaissance, except now, of course, being 4th edition, everything's color, which I really appreciate. So once again, and I just went kind of crazy. Big full-page illustrations. I probably won't be this great. Actually, I won't be this crazy going forward, just because I don't want to take advantage of these illustrations, because if someone's doing an illustration for half a page, it should stay half a page. And of course, this is getting a little on the peeling side just because it is print on demand through drive-through. But there was that one, and it was the Compendium. Then we move on to Fate. Now, I didn't do the Fate version. It was done by Chris Stilson. It has my name on it because it's my setting, but the actual adaptation was done by Christopher Stilson. And we see Christopher Stilson still has Conavige's name on it, myself, and so forth. So I did all those fluff writing. And I don't play Fate. I've never played Fate in my life. The only time I've ever experienced is when I saw, I think, Will Wheaton playing Fate on tabletop. So I just basically had to follow Chris's guidelines, copy paste what he wrote, and then I, of course, wrote the setting. This is because Fate's a very simple rule set. This is one of the smallest books at 350 pages. As you can see here, we have a new map. This is this is Jeremy Simmons' revised map. There will be a 3rd map that we're going to show you quite soon. I have no idea what these rules mean, but that's it. This is the Fate version Destiny. I know that Chris said, and he actually makes a point of reminding me to tell people that he had followed the advice of certain people when he did the adaptation to kind of break up the expectations and do something completely off kilter, and the response was not positive. In fact, Chris has said, and has stated kind of officially, that he's been upset with what he felt was he was encouraged to go in a direction that the audience, that the fan base didn't actually appreciate. So he got convinced by a minority to do things that the majority would not like. And so he has been talking about going back and redoing these original Fate books. Now, Savage World has got even a more interesting story. I was talking with Shane Hensley from Savage World, and he said, we have to support you. Absolutely, go ahead. But we highly recommend that you don't publish books that size. Our audience, he said, our audience wants smaller books. So in something that I regret heavily, I was convinced to split the Savage World books into 2. So we have, once again, it's still the same size of book. We just split it in half. We have the player's guide, and we have the world guide for Savage World. I really regret doing this, but I was convinced by the publishers to do it. So you can get these separately on drive-through. And it's important to note that people who purchase one do end up purchasing both. It's almost a 100% one-on-one purchase. So splitting them was kind of pointless, says I think there's only 1 or 2 additional players guides sold if I go into details. But Once again, I don't have any experience with the Savage World setting. There's a little bit of carryover because obviously we had to make sure that there was some common content. So it's 180 pages for one, 200 pages for the other, which if you combine them would make this the largest book. But like I said, there is some carryover. So and going forward, I find the fact that this is the only version where the two books are split up. I really regret. Some people actually think that this should be how it should be, and I should produce all these small books. And I don't know why I don't, but that's just how I do it. Ultramodern, for example, it's got everything put together. I should technically, because Ultramodern Redo is also a massive book of 400 pages, that I should split them into the Ultramodern Player's Guide and Ultramodern GM Guide. And maybe, I don't know, in the future for a third reprint, I'll consider that. But most people now expect Ultramodern just to be one book. So that's basically how it's going to go on moving forward. But that being said, the next original IP I do, maybe we will, like Apex and Neurospasta. If I do a reprint of Apex and Neurospasta, then I can almost guarantee that those will still be one book. But if I do a completely new IP from the ground up, it might be separate books. But anyway, that is Untamed. 13th Age. Oh, yeah, is this one getting a little, yeah, it's getting a little peeled. Let's see here. Got some comments here. I've enjoyed your books on here since I've been playing Ultramodern 5 Redo lately on Foundry, but there's no module for it, so I had to custom make the sheets myself. Wonder in the future if there will be an actual. Hey, first of all, thank you for doing that. The answer is yes. Now that we have people on board to do the adaptations for Foundry, Shard's doing their adaptation on their own. Fantasy Grounds is doing the adaptation on their own, but we are doing we're doing Roll20 and Foundry ourselves. And I can't remember what else we're doing. I have to check it real quickly here. No, we just crossed 81. Cool. So yeah, Roll20, Foundry, Fantasy Grounds, Shard, Tabletop. We are doing Roll20 and Foundry, and then Fantasy Grounds and Shard are doing their own. The actual timetable is that the guys that I have doing the Foundry and Roll20 modules, they will be doing the Ultramodern ones first, and then they'll be doing the Amethyst ones. And the reason why, of course, is that Ultramodern Amethyst, I wanted them to do Amethyst when it's fully finished, and Revelations isn't finished yet. And Ultramodern is more popular, and so I want to make sure that it gets covered first. So we'll be doing the adaptation for Roll20 and Foundry for Ultramodern, and then we'll do it if we run a Kickstarter for an Apex second edition, Neurospasta second edition, probably as one campaign. Part of that's going to be updating those modules as well. We get here, no Amethyst compendium for print on demand for drive-through. Notice some books have POD and some don't. Don't understand why. That's a good question. Is somewhat of a complicated answer. The reason why is because there were, and at some point, drive-through RPG turned them off, and now for me to reactivate them, I have to order new proofs, and proofs aren't cheap, especially for books that are this big. They're like $60-$70 to send a proof, and so I do plan on doing it. I think there's no print on demand option, I think, for the D20 version, and that's intentional because it's apocryphal, and we're no longer really supporting that. And to make that compliant would require a lot of work because I would have to rebuild the entire thing in InDesign. And there's just no demand for adapting the D20 again or updating the original 2008 D20 version, and I'm not interested in doing that. But for other ones, modules aren't on print on demand. So Fistful of Dragons and the 3 Affinity modules also don't have print on demand options. That's intentional. They are designed for digital only. I don't build them to be published. But core books, Apex, Neurospasta, those should all be available on print. And if any of them aren't, that means that something's happened and drive-throughs turned them off. And eventually I will get to it. I know the print on demand for Amethyst Compendium is a big deal, but it's just one of those situations where um, I know how to do it. I just have to just sit down and do it. And I have to remind myself. I'll probably do it this week now that people are reminding me. It's just I got to bite, pull the trigger and then spend the money and get it. 'Cause the files are ready. I just have to do it. So Jeremy, they are doing a Foundry module for Amethyst in this Kickstarter. Can probably use that for Ultramodern 5. And the answer is it's yes, but we're doing the other way around. We're doing Ultramodern 5 first, and then adapting Amethyst using Ultramodern 5. The reason why is that at 85,000, we're only less than 4,000 away, and we still have 10 days left, so we're probably definitely going to hit 85. We are doing a rebuild of Amethyst Quintessence, and that's going to be incorporating a lot of stuff from Ultramodern 5 that we have learned, because as people know, Amethyst came first, and then Ultramodern 5 spun off of Amethyst. And it's gone through a second edition, so I want to take the second edition stuff we've learned and pull that back into Amethyst. Now, some stuff's not going to go in. Ladders are not part of Amethyst. All the unique monsters for Ultramodern won't show up, so you won't see the skin. You won't see the unique magic system that's an Ultramodern 5 redo, because that's entirely an Ultramodern mechanic. It's not canonical for Amethyst. Amethyst is going to have its own original magic system that we unlocked some time ago. So yes, the answer is we're doing Ultramodern 5 first, then we're going to be doing Amethyst, and then by then we will have decided which project we're going forward after Amethyst. If it's going to be, actually we'll go into that in a little second about what the next project will be, but if the Ultramodern conversions are smooth and Amethyst is done smoothly, then I will be employing those same people to do all of our modules going forward. But there it is, Apotheosis. This is 13th Age. In case you haven't figured out, the names of the core books are somewhat inspired. So 13th Age, the final age, Apotheosis, Savage World, Untamed, Fate is called Destiny, Pathfinder is called Renaissance. I'm not even sure where that came from. And of course, we talk about 5th edition, Quintessence, and 5th edition, and so forth. The 13th Age one is 300 pages. 390 pages, sorry. So it's one of the smaller ones, because I actually really, 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 really love 13th Age. I think it's a really cool system. Certain things about it I really liked. Monster stats are amazing because they were so simplistic. I really appreciate it. It was written by people who did 4th edition, so I liked what they've learned from it. I love the fact in the 13th Age books, there is kind of this color commentary by the editors and what they had in mind. So I followed that same philosophy, and so we have those here. I ended up carrying them into Quintessence because I enjoyed an editorial by the creators. And so you can tell who is me, who I am, and who is Chris Stilson. So that's Chris Stilson, and if you see the bog face, that is me. And funnily enough, despite the fact that Chris Stilson's Destiny book didn't get a lot of love, the 13th Age community, I have to admit, they freaking love this book. I love the fact that the Rob Heinsu backed my Kickstarter because he knew I was doing a 13th Age version. I really appreciate it. He's a really awesome guy. So I really, really like the Apotheosis version, and I would love to continue writing for it if it wasn't the weakest selling of those books. And I don't think it has anything to do with Amethyst. 13th Age is just, its third-party marketplace is just very, very small. It's unfortunate, but it is true. But that is the core book, Apotheosis. Which eventually brings us to this one, Quintessence, which was me kind of, this is what Ultramodern 5 was spun off of. It is, by the way, I'm still using Microsoft Publisher by the time we got to this one. And a lot of text, a lot of images, and it's not the biggest, I think. Yeah, it's 406. So the compendium is bigger, but compendium is bigger because of the classes are so large. And of course, obviously, people know about this. I've been posting pages about this. And I can't remember if we ended up using anyone else's illustrations. I think, is it just Nick, or did a couple? Yeah, no, there's still a couple of illustrations still. So like that's a Jamie Jones illustration right there. Right, you can tell it definitely does not look like Nick's style. This is an illustration of what a limb shell looks like. So that is Quintessence, and I think, is this one falling apart? Yeah, a little bit. And then we got to producing the sequel. Let's get Destiny over there. And I'm not going to show them all because they're all basically identical. Because unlike the core books, the factions books all look the same. They just say Pathfinder or what have you. And so as a result, they're very similar in size. Obviously, the Destiny and 13th Age books are smaller. This one's completely fallen apart. That's lightning swords for you. And now the maps have been changed, so now they're done by Chris Dilson's. Chris Dilson, who's the editor, also did the illustration. I really like his look, his visual style. And we ended up writing an in-canon story. There's a big excerpt blurb that explains the discrepancies between the three maps. And there's a story about these three maps being made, and then the fact that these maps here also were made in canon. And there's a whole story about why there are variations of what's in the explanation. It's very mysterious. And this is also when we started off this new trend on this half page with this torn page with this font and so forth. This is the look going forward. This is what we're going to be doing when we rebuild Quintessence and when we release Revelations. That being said, as I said, this was still done using Publisher, and we don't use Publisher anymore. We use InDesign. So yeah. So that is the Amethyst Factions books. The other thing, of course, is that we're going to make sure that when we redo them, that they'll all look the same. So Quintessence is going to go through quite a big reboot because it's going to have a cover that's going to look similar to Factions. And then Revelations will look similar to that. So we want to make sure that they're all basically the same. For those people who don't know, one second, put my thing down here. I'm not sure why I have headphones on. I don't need them. This is our last Kickstarter. This is the one that finished just in May for digital. It's on the boat right now. So it's basically almost finished, heading toward distribution. This gives you an idea of the scope and scale that we're hoping to do with the Amethyst Kickstarter. Let's see, I'm going to show this. Ugh. And this is the luxury version of Affinity. Now, this is a magnet class. We're not doing this for Amethyst because Amethyst is going to be more than 3 books. And Affinity won't be. Affinity is just these 3 books. We are using the same printer. I'm going to take these out. And this is actually, I'll grab Taurus because people like seeing Taurus. So this is kind of what we're going to be looking at for the luxury editions of Amethyst. This leather, and you see some detail in the leather. Metal corners are a stretch goal that's coming up. We'll certainly get that. So we're going to get some metal corners. And like before, backers will get to choose and get to vote on what they prefer for their style of corner and so forth. Gilded pages. Can't remember if we got to gilded pages yet. Well, we're getting there. Should be pretty close to it. But I know gilded pages are either a thing we've gotten. Let's check here. World maps, gilded pages. Yep, we got gilded pages already. We got gilded pages at 70,000. So those are the gilded pages right there. Now this is a proof copy. So it's not 100%. It's about 95%. But you can see. Let's get some cool stuff going and show off how kind of we've evolved our style. Let's actually get to guns. That's where all the fun stuff is, right? Guns and guns and guns. There you go. So you can see we've kind of really advanced now that we've switched to InDesign. It is a lot easier. It was a bit complex. It was a bit more complex learning curve, but it was I really appreciate these new illustration styles. Now, this art style is not going to be seen in Amethyst because we wanted a very specific visual style, and that's why these illustrations look as if they're flawed. Like we can see here, there's etches and paint and paint spill and so forth. That's all intentional, but that's very much an Affinity because these books are meant to look like in-tomb manuals. And when you see that, because there's this, pieces of paper taped off, right? And it's covering up an illustration that you can't see. It's a whole thing. Satin bookmark, which I think we've already unlocked. That's also coming in the luxury edition. We talked about the gilded pages and so forth. And then we have the embossment, which we'll be doing for Amethyst as well. There is one thing that the Amethyst books will have that these don't have, because when we designed these, we designed this for the previous publisher that didn't offer it, and the new publisher did. So anyway, so that's Taurus, that's Conestoga, and Paradise. In the case of these situations, we did different colors for each one. They all have the same metal corners. Amethyst, they'll all be purple because Amethyst, that's the color. We are approaching unlocking world maps. Give you ideas. This is not a world map that we designed, but this is a map somebody else designed. So give you an idea, some neat ideas that we have. So we have the potential of doing a world map looking like this, and that's going to be kind of cool. This was an attempt that was sent to us. Dungeon maps is something else that's a stretch goal coming up. So doing the same thing with these, but all the dungeon maps that we've made for Amethyst will be making available for this one. One of the other things they offered us was sticker books, sticker pages. So these are once again examples that they sent to us. I'm not sure exactly what these are from, but there they are. That is something that we're thinking of doing. It's a stretch goal, but people voted, and because we have this, and we also have pins. These were, again, not pins that we designed. These were a test that was given to us. So it's not small pins. They're actually quite large. So much there's actually 2 pins for each one. So that's cool. I like that. So that's an also upcoming stretch goal. And then we have the standees. I don't have an example of the standees, but standees hold cardboard with a plastic stand. So the stands will come up before pins, and the pins will show up before the stickers if we get that far. We'll see what happens. And then finally, and this is something that I'm not going to mention in the update that's going up today. So this is something just for you guys who watch this, guys and girls, are they coming in watching this? This is a stretch goal is coming up. Can't really see it so well. Where's the other one here? Maybe show that off. I had it here, and I cannot see where I put it. Oh, there it is. Got a couple of them, actually. Now, you can't really see the 3D effect with this, but you can definitely see the lenticular, what this is, lenticular. So if you actually were looking at this, in person, you would see that the blade is looking like it's sticking out, and the background characters in the background. We have something similar with this right here, which is another example, right? We can see that it changes and the flame becomes somewhat animated. This is called a lenticular page, and this is a stretch goal for the luxury versions of Amethyst. So this would be like a big cover plate that would cover up a small, probably the center section, and it's going to have that type of look to it. That's coming up. I'm hoping we'll get to it, but it's a cool, so we'll have a lenticular cover, which I'm kind of in love with. I'd love to have lenticular covers for the luxury books. For the standard books, the only thing that we really have unlocked for that is going to be the spot UV, because the standard books are standard books and so forth. So they're not going to be as fancy as the luxury books. So luxury books, hopefully, they'll have a higher quality paper, spot UV. No, you won't spot UV. They'll have leather. They'll have metal corners, and then they'll have the satin bookmark and then lenticular cover, which would be really, really cool. This, by the way, we just got this. This is the print-on-demand version of the standard version of Affinity. So looks good. Doesn't have that glossy feeling paper, and doesn't have the metal corners. And it doesn't have the spot UV either, because only the actual print from China will have the spot UV coating. So that is basically what we got going for, and it talks about the history of Amethyst and what we have going forward. Like I said, we crossed 80,000 yesterday, so we'll be doing an update talking about paper quality increase. And at 85, we'll announce the next 3 stretch goals. And there was something else I wanted to talk about. There was another person who made a question about audiobooks. So somebody had a question about audiobooks. And the audiobook is, as people might know, there's an audiobook for Affinity being made. It kind of exploded because the Affinity novel, and I had an Affinity novel here. Oh, well, I can show you these things. There is the first novel for Amethyst, Aiden's Way. This was printed off of Blurb, and then you have a sequel, Controlling Chaos. Now, piece of information that I think is interesting that this is technically one book. I was with an editor, an agent at the time, who said this book is too big, split it, cut it down to this page count. And then I did, and he says, still not interested. I'm like, okay, whatever. But they stayed that way. But technically, these were supposed to be one book. But there is a point where there was a good climax that I could split it. But there's supposed to be 5 books for Amethyst, if you include the fact that this is supposed to be one book. The issue, of course, is that if I stick with my original plan of being 5 books, then Hallowed Kingdom has to be significantly larger. It's going to be this book, this size, which is related to the Affinity. Oh, there it is. The Affinity is very large. There's Affinity. So you can see the comparison, significantly bigger in every respect. But there's an audiobook for Affinity. Now, Affinity was actually a much more complicated project because as an audiobook, because it has like 14 characters. It's got like maybe 30 voice characters, about 12 of them which have more than 100 lines, and 3 of them that have 800 lines a piece, if not more. And then we ended up getting a bunch of people to help us. So we had people like John Core, who's in The Flash. He's got he's actually got a couple big roles coming. He's becoming very much well known, which I totally predict because he's an amazing actor. Looks amazing. He's handsome as hell. And Mark Meir, and people know Mark Meir. I'm very good friends with Mark Meir. I don't deserve his friendship. He's an awesome guy. He, of course, is very big on D&D. He does a lot of D&D, does D&D in the castle. He's done a lot of live D&Ds. He basically works with Wizards of the Coast a lot for their live D&D stuff. Anyway, so he's actually did the narration. He did the narration for my Narromata game. He did Ultra Modern. Affinity and Amethyst were narrated by John the Vegan Giant. That's his name, John Fink. He's an amazing voice actor, incredibly talented, amazing voice. And he put together a great team in California to do the audio work for Affinity. We've gotten half a dozen amazingly overtly talented, amazing voice actors that are doing these roles. John Core is doing one role, Mark Meir is doing one role, and then we have a handful of other actors that I know that are doing other roles. And then almost everything else is done by these voice actors. But it's a very, very big project. So much so, because I've said 500 pages, 12 actors. John's still doing the editing even now. And I haven't approached him yet about doing an audiobook for Amethyst, just because I don't want to have him commit while he's still working on Affinity, because Affinity is such a large project. I kind of want to make sure that he can deliver that project before I would make a commitment for doing an audiobook. Because we had somebody making comment just this morning about doing an audiobook for Amethyst. I would love doing an audiobook. And the funny thing is, it'll be a lot easier because obviously it's a much smaller book. But not only that, it's got a much smaller footprint. When it comes to characters, there's only 4 major characters. Everyone, there's a bunch of small roles, but only 4 major characters. And then we get to Controlling Chaos. We only introduce like 2 or 3 new people. It's much more self-enclosed. It's much more of a fantasy story compared to Affinity, which is this big kind of, I wouldn't call it Game of Thrones. It just has a lot of characters. And I know Game of Thrones has a lot of characters, but the structure of Game of Thrones and the structure of Amethyst of Affinity are very, very different. So yes, Aiden's Way would be a much easier, much smaller, much faster project for John. So it's interesting that we're hitting him with this big project first, which is Affinity, but I want to make sure that he can deliver that. If he can deliver Affinity, then this is just a walk in the park in comparison. I have not approached him about doing an audiobook for Amethyst. Once I'm convinced that it's a project that he can do, I will approach him for that. And if that's true, then we'll either offer it as a stretch goal. And if we cross that stretch goal, then we'll do one for Aiden's Way. And then we'll have another stretch goal that will do one for Controlling Chaos, and then one finally for Hallowed Kingdom when that one gets written. So finally, if anyone asks any questions, by the way, pop them in the comments. I will address them. But I want to talk about a couple things that's going in the update today, because there's going to be an update today where we're going to reveal that we have 13 stretch goals crossed, and all the campaign page will reflect that. And I also made a joke that if we cross 100K, we get to have a pet, which we decided yesterday. But I wanted to make official that Chris Stilson, C. Peregrine Stilson, who was the editor for most of the Amethyst books, he wasn't the editor on Affinity. I brought someone else on board, and it didn't work out because it just took too long, and I wasn't very happy with the result. So Chris is coming back to work on Amethyst, and we had a long discussion about the other adaptations, because people have asked, is like, well, you've been done it for 5 different systems, are going to be supporting them in the future. And despite the fact that there's still an audience for 4th edition, there is still an audience for 4th edition. And of course, my career got started with 4th edition. It's very hard for me to justify doing a 4th edition book. I have to look at the market share. It comes down to that. I have to look at the market share. 4th edition is a extremely minuscule portion of that audience. And it's unfortunate, but it's true. The same thing goes with 13th Age. We probably won't be supporting 13th Age anymore. If I had a lot of free time and I could just go crazy, sure, maybe I would do 13th Age. And the problem with Pathfinder, and I've had this conversation several times with people who have been asking for a Pathfinder version. I'm not going to say I won't do one for the original Pathfinder first edition, just because the first 2 books were done. So adapting Revelations wouldn't be as huge a deal. But when someone asks, will you do a Pathfinder 2nd edition? I'm like, I can't see myself doing that. We'd have to rebuild the first 2 books completely from ground up. I have to learn the system. I'd have to write 1,200 pages of rules. And I just can't see myself doing that. Comparison to the fact that if you look at Roll20 4 or 5 years ago, and Pathfinder had like a 5% market share, and D&D had about a 45% market share. And if you look at it just recently, that 5% got split to 2.5 and 2.5 between first and 2nd edition. So Pathfinder didn't win any new people. They just split their own existing audience. And now it becomes even more difficult to justify doing a Pathfinder version. However, Chris Stilson, who did the Fate Core and Savage World, I told him that the biggest problem isn't the adaptation. It's just the writing of the rules and so forth. Publishing the book, at least digitally, is not a big deal. So I told Chris, as we had a conversation this week, that if he wanted to do a Fate edition on a Savage World edition for Revelations, then I'll do the layout, and then we'll do the same agreement as we did before. So he said yes, but on the condition that he wants to rebuild the first 2 books, because he wants to redo the Fate version to be what he wants it to be rather than what he got convinced it to be, which ended up not happening. So with the big update today, the big announcement is that we are doing now, Amethyst Revelations will be made for Fate and Savage World. That's the big announcement that's going out today. So the new Amethyst Kickstarter will be supporting 3 systems officially so far: Fate and Savage World, as well as 5th edition, which I think is a good swath. There's a large market there that I'd love to support. Now, when we hit 85K, which we're very close to, we will be unlocking the page 1 rebuild of Quintessence. And since we're almost certainly getting there, that will involve the page 1 rebuild of Fate. So anyone who purchased the first 2 books for Fate or Savage World, these are updated files for these, won't be released separately. So if you want to get the 3rd book and you do play Fate or Savage World, then just purchase the Revelations. You'll get the 5th edition, but you'll also get the Fate and Savage World editions as well. If you want to get into Fate and Savage World Amethyst and you haven't gotten any of them, go for the digital set. Now, it's important to note, someone's going to ask, will there be print versions? And the answer, of course, is no, because we're not going to print 3 different versions of this book. 5th edition is the print version of Amethyst. It'll just be like it was before. We're doing full digital releases for these titles. So, in summary, what you're going to be seeing is when you back a certain pledge level for a book, you will get it digitally for Fate, Savage World, and 5th edition. And then if you back to print edition, you'll get the print version of the 5th edition book. So people are going to ask, like, do we have to pay extra? Are we going to have to back another level? And the answer is no. It's going to make things so complicated. So I'm just going to throw it in as a new reward. If you've backed Amethyst for 5th edition, you will get the Savage World and Fate versions of those books as part of that reward. So if you back Revelations, you'll get Revelations for all 3 systems. If you got 3 books, you'll get 9 different PDFs, the 3 books in 3 different versions. The print will only be 5th edition. So these are new rewards that are going to be added. We will, it's going to be updated. The page is going to be updated. So there's a lot of graphics we have to do today. So you may not see that go into effect. I'm not even sure when, because I have to do all those images first before we do the update. So it'll probably be later today. If not even tomorrow morning when all that artwork gets finished, because we have to do the update for the 13th. So stretch goal, we need to, I've already added Chris Tilson's editor portfolio to the page, and then we have a bunch of other things to go. But that's the big update, the fact that now we are supporting Savage World and Savage Fate. And this will involve a complete rebuild of those first 2 books for those systems. And this is where I thought, like, it would have been so much easier if I hadn't split the Untamed books, because now we have to rebuild those 2 books separately, which is just going to be friggin' annoying. If it was up to me, then I would combine the books, but then I would have to release it as a separate SKU, and I just don't want to do that to the Savage World community, so we just have to redo it as that. Anyway, so we have a question here. Since I went in on the new Amethyst 5e Kickstarter, might suggest a 4e conversion pamphlet for the newest book. That's not out of the blue. The thing is, if it was Factions, it would be easy, because Factions is almost entirely fluff. So, we add the new race, we add a handful of new monsters. The thing about Revelations, of course, is that Revelations, we're introducing 5 or 6 new classes. So, where Quintessence, for example, was about 50% crunch, 50% fluff, and the Factions was about 70% fluff, 30% crunch. Revelations is about 60-40. And as a result, it's going to be more work to do the adaptation. And for me, the other issue, of course, is that, like with Chris Tilson, all he needs to do is grab the Revelation stuff I give him and then produce it for Savage World and Fate, and then I just do the layout. My problem is the fact that I have to write the 5th edition, then I have to write the novel. And because I have to write the novel and I have to do the layouts for all these books, I have the biggest workload. And I know 4th edition. I would probably say that outside of the people who wrote 4th edition, I'm probably the biggest authority on 4th edition as a third-party publisher. No one's produced more 4th edition stuff, successful 4th edition stuff, outside of Wizards of the Coast than myself. I'll make that claim, just because of all the stuff that I did, and I was one of the most successful 4th edition third-party publishers out there. I did Ultramodern 4. Ultramodern 5 doesn't exist if it wasn't for the success of Ultramodern 4. Ultramodern 4 was a huge success in comparison for 4th edition. But I also know how complex and how different. I mean, converting 5th edition to Pathfinder is not impossible. A lot of the jargon is the same. There's some things that are similar. Fate and Savage World are simpler systems, so it's easier to convert. 4th edition is a nightmare. And it's not even hard. I can write 4th edition quite easily. But the point is that I couldn't copy paste mechanics from 5th edition. I would have to start from the ground up. And as you know, classes in 4th edition are massive. So there's 2 ways I can approach it. And on top of that, you have 4th edition and 4th edition essentials. And with Compendium is so big because I supported both. Now, for the people who don't know, 4th edition essentials was a kind of melding between 3rd edition and 4th. It gave you a lot of the customization of 4th edition, but it made it feel more 3rd edition. And I actually really like essentials, because it gave you the utility powers, but your primary attack abilities felt more like 3rd edition. It was kind of this hybrid between 3rd and 4th. I love it. But it was a late publication. I wouldn't say it was unsuccessful. It was very well received, but by then the writing was on the wall and 4th edition was already kind of going out the door. So for me, I would have to kind of do both. So I would have to make these fantasy classes that are being presented in Revelations. And then the funny thing is that technically, a leather girl, you might actually have a point. And the reason why is the bard. I can't remember now. I don't have my player's handbook near me. The ranger. I have the itchy nose. I always get it whenever I go live. I don't know if I explain this. The ranger in 4th edition was non-magical. He was entirely a arrow, two-sworded guy. And that's what we're doing when we're presenting our new revised ranger, is to strip out the magic from him and make him a classic ranger. And I can't remember if the paladin. I don't know if the paladin was a hard spellcraft class. So I mean, the answer to the question is yes. We probably could do a pamphlet, but it would just be like an updated file. It would just be monsters. And it wouldn't, I don't know if I would do the classes. Like, it would just be one of those situations where here are the monsters, you have the original classes, like what our plans are for the 5th edition fantasy classes is to take what we've learned from these other systems and play with them. So like I wouldn't necessarily need, I can't remember if the bard was heavily magical in 4th edition. It's been actually a while since I've actually published or written for the 4th edition. So, and the other issues, like I said, I can't just go 4th edition and start writing. I actually have to relearn a system. So I have to unlearn 5th edition and then learn 4th edition, which is the reason why I don't want to tackle a Pathfinder or 13th Age version, because it's very time consuming. For those people who know, when I did the 2014 Kickstarter for Amethyst, the hardest book to write was the Pathfinder version. 13th Age was the easiest. 4th edition I already kind of knew, so it was quite easy to work with. And Pathfinder was like pulling teeth out, especially going to the monster chapter. Took me a month. It was demoralizing. So there's a part of me that really doesn't want to write for Pathfinder, because it is 4th edition, and 4th edition was written for the GMs in mind. And I liked 4th edition because it put the GMs first. They have the harder job of the group, so let's make their job easier. 5th edition kind of went halfy. It kind of pandered a little bit to the GMs, but it still wrote for the players in mind. And Pathfinder in 3rd edition was written for players in mind, which is the reason why being a GM was such a slog. And that's why with 4th edition, someone could be a GM and not go, oh crap, I have to be the GM. I have to do all that work. It was fun. It was fun to play as, you had minions, which is something I brought into 5th edition. There's a lot of things that made things easier. But when you're doing Pathfinder or 3rd edition, it was a colossal pain to be a GM because of all the work you had to do. So we'll see. We have to make Revelations first, see how much mechanical content we're putting in, because there's going to be a lot of fluff. There's going to be a lot of monsters. And then I have to look at and see how much content is in there and is it worthwhile? I know that when it comes to people making requests, yes, I've had more requests for people asking for a Pathfinder version than anything else. And that's the one I want to do the least. And it's the honest to God truth. And that's because of the rule set as much as the market share. But that's the thing. We'll see. I'm not going to say no to an updated pamphlet. The thing is that if I do the work for a 4th edition and I make the mechanics, I might as well just publish the book. Because I'm using, because the whole point of this rebuild is to create new permanent files in InDesign that I can use for all future books. So once I make like the fluff chapter, once the fluff chapter is written, it just gets moved into these other systems. The only thing that changes is the mechanical chapters on the other side, the monsters and the adventure and the classes at the beginning. So if I'm already done doing all the stuff for 4th edition, I might as well do the whole book. It's not going to be that much more work, maybe a couple days extra work after I've written the stuff. So I'm not going to say no. I'm not going to make a decision during the Kickstarter just because I have too much work. And the reason we're announcing the Fate and Savage World version is that Chris Stilson's doing that, not me. And it would have to be a pretty powerful movement to convince me to announce a 13th Age or Pathfinder version during the setting. When we ran the original 2014 Kickstarter, yes, we did announce 13th Age and I think Savage World during the campaign. We didn't announce it like at the beginning. I do believe it was Pathfinder 4th edition and 5th edition. And then we announced Savage World and Fate Core either just before the campaign and during, and one of them was, and then 13th Age might have been announced during the campaign. And so by the end of it, we had all 5 systems supported. And that's why the campaign took 4 years. And I'm not going to do a 4-year campaign. I wanted to get the vast majority of the writing done for the games and the layout done. I wanted to do 80-90% of this work by the late spring. Like people, when people see the timetable going, the delivery time of the end of next year, 2023, that's more or less accommodating Nick Greenwood and his illustrations, not my writing. I want to be completely done way before then. We also gave ourselves a bit more time because of delays that we've had with the physical production run. So my goal is to actually beat this deadline and not be late. So we'll see what happens. My priority is the rebuilds and the new rules, and only if I have free time will I make an official announcement for for 4th edition or Pathfinder. But the big announcement here is Fate Court and Savage World is now getting announced. It'll probably get live with the next update. So now we're just hitting an hour because I did launch on the campaign a bit late. So I'll wait for another 2 minutes for any questions people might have. Meanwhile, thank you to David Smith who backed the campaign. I appreciate that. We are inching closer to the big 85. We're at 81 something. Yep, 81,164. So we are closing in, and hopefully, if we can get to 85 in the next few days, then I get to announce and reveal the next few campaigns. What I would like to do is to encourage people more to get the physical books. I think once we announce some of the cool physical stuff that's happening with the books, I mean, we already have Spot UV, but I think once we announce the lenticular cover and the metal corners and so forth, that maybe it'll encourage some people to upgrade to the luxury version. Because I've noticed a lot more people with Affinity, a lot more people did push for the physical books. With Amethyst, people are going more for the digital. So I'm hoping that as we get closer to the end of the campaign, more people will opt to go with the physical books, especially once we show the value. I know the physical books for Amethyst are more expensive, but they're also twice the size as Affinity, and I think we priced them quite fairly. But yeah, I'll give another minute or so, and then we'll call it quits. If anyone has any final questions, shove it in the comments. This is our last shipment back. You can see it back here. This is the ultra-modern GM screen. So anyone who opts for the all-in pledge is going to get one of these. And we are pretty close to getting an Amethyst GM screen as well, which will mean you get both this screen and the Amethyst screen. And we also have the Ultra Modern 5 Special Edition. I'm not going to unwrap this one. I have ones that are unwrapped over there, but that's you can see it's got Spot UV. It's a slipcase. It slips right out. I will also say that although we're not doing a slipcase or a box for Amethyst, one of the things that we might do as a stretch goal, because we might have a bit more room, is offering individual slipcases for the leather books. So we won't have a slipcase for all 3, but every book will have their own slipcase. That's going to get revealed. I don't know where that one is, but it's coming up soon. Okay. I use UM5 as a flashback style lead into the initial Hammer and Amethyst. My players wanted that. That's cool. Now, the interesting thing about Amethyst is that every major book had an adventure built in. Hearts of Chaos, by the way, is technically a module. It was written with Amethyst Foundations as an introductory to the rules, and that's why it's very simplistic. It quite literally is just a sequence of events. There's not even a dungeon in there. And then there's Single Stone, which is the adventure inside the core book. And then there's Fall of the Proto-Merkaba, I think, which is the big adventure at the back of Factions. And we should have an adventure. That's that stretch goal coming up. That'll be included. It's probably a really good idea when we release that is to have the module. The module will be inside the book like normally, but we'll probably also have it as a separate PDF so that GMs can use that as their own. And yeah, but there should be an adventure coming up as a stretch goal. Don't know what the details of what that adventure will be yet. Okay, guys, so that is 12:12 or just over an hour here. So I will call it quits, and we will be working on that big update, and it should be out either later today or tomorrow morning. Anyway, guys, thanks a lot. This has been Chris from DiasExMachina.